The room went dead silent. Not the polite, uncomfortable silence that settles when someone tells an inappropriate joke at a dinner party. This was something different, something primal. The kind of silence that happens when the air itself seems to stop moving. When 47 of Hollywood's most powerful people collectively realize that the world they've built, the world they profit from, the world they've defended their entire careers, has just been exposed in front of everyone who matters. Muhammad Ali stood in the center of Clint Eastwood's living room, his voice still hanging in the air like smoke that refused to disappear. And Clint Eastwood, the man who had spent 30 years playing the toughest, bravest man on screen, stood across the room with a champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips, unable to think of a single word to say. What Ali had just spoken wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult. It was worse than both. It was the truth. And the truth, delivered by the most famous man on the planet, in front of the people who control Hollywood's narrative, was something this industry had spent decades making sure nobody ever said out loud. This is the story nobody wanted told. Before we continue with the story, you can support us by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Don't forget to write in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. Let's continue. It was November 1974. 3 weeks earlier, Muhammad Ali had traveled to Kinshasa, Zaire, and defeated the supposedly unbeatable George Foreman in what the world would forever call the Rumble in the Jungle. At 32 years old, he had reclaimed the heavyweight championship. He was, by any measure, the most famous human being on the planet. But fame in 1974 America was a complicated thing, especially for a black man. Ali wasn't just a boxer. He was a Muslim who had refused to fight in Vietnam. He was a man the United States government had tried to imprison. He was a civil rights figure, a cultural icon, a lightning rod for every tension tearing America apart. And in Hollywood, the machine that shaped how the world saw America, Ali represented something deeply uncomfortable. He was proof that black men could be powerful without permission. Hollywood in 1974 was an empire built on contradictions. Films like Shaft and Superfly had shown that black audiences would spend real money to see black heroes on screen. Sidney Poitier had won an Oscar. On the surface, things were changing. But underneath, the architecture of power hadn't moved an inch. The executives who greenlit films were almost exclusively white. The directors who shaped narratives, the producers who decided which stories got told, all white. And there was an unspoken rule, understood by everyone but never articulated in polite company. Black actors could be talented. They could even be popular, but they could never truly be in charge. That was the world Muhammad Ali walked into on the night of November 15th, 1974. The party was at Clint Eastwood's home in the Hollywood Hills, a sprawling modern house that looked effortless, but it cost more money than most Americans would earn in a lifetime. Eastwood had purchased it 2 years earlier, riding the success of Dirty Harry, the film that had turned him into something closer to a national symbol. Eastwood was 44. He was at a critical juncture, still acting, but increasingly determined to direct. He was building a reputation as a man who got things done, who rejected Hollywood conventions, who made films on his own terms. Politically conservative, libertarian in his instincts, and by every public account, a man who genuinely believed he was not prejudiced. This was the key detail. Eastwood wasn't a villain. He wasn't someone who expressed hatred openly. He was something far more common and far harder to confront. A man who considered himself enlightened while operating comfortably inside a system that was anything but. He had invited Ali because it made sense on the surface. Ali was the most famous athlete alive. Eastwood respected toughness. It was his brand. Having Muhammad Ali at your party was a statement. It said, "I'm not afraid. I don't draw lines where other people draw them." What Eastwood hadn't anticipated was that Ali might have his own reasons for being there. Ali arrived at 9:15 p.m., later than most guests. He came alone. No entourage, no trainer, no bodyguard. Just Muhammad Ali, in a tailored dark suit, stepping through the front door of a house filled with people who controlled the most powerful storytelling machine in human history. The effect was immediate. Conversation slowed, then stopped. Not because Ali was intimidating. Though at 6 feet 3 inches and 215 pounds, his presence alone demanded attention. It was because of what he represented. In a room full of people who made their living pretending, Muhammad Ali was the only person there who had actually done something real. Ali, Eastwood appeared at his side, hand extended, smile genuine. Glad you could make it. Beautiful place you got here, Ali said, shaking the hand. His smile was warm. Easy. The Ali that the public knew, charismatic, disarming, instantly likable. For the first hour, everything went as planned. Ali was gracious, shook hands, told stories about the Foreman fight that had the room leaning forward. But Ali was also watching. That was something people missed about him. Behind the showmanship, behind the charm, Muhammad Ali was one of the most observant people who ever lived. And on this night, he was seeing something that made his jaw tighten every time he encountered it. He was seeing who spoke and who listened, whose jokes got laughed at and whose fell into silence. He was watching the handful of black guests, 3 actors, a musician, a record executive, position themselves at the edges of every conversation, never at the center, smiling too quickly, laughing a beat too early, making themselves smaller in spaces where they had every right to take up room. Ali had grown up in Louisville in the 1940s and 50s. He knew exactly what that cost. And watching these men do it in 1974, in a room full of people who called themselves liberal, who would have sworn they treated everyone the same, it made something burn steadily inside his chest. Something was coming. The moment that changed the night didn't come from Ali. It came from someone else entirely. His name was Walter Hoffman. He was 58 years old, a senior executive at one of the major studios. The public wouldn't have recognized his face. But in this room, he was one of the most powerful men present. He controlled budgets in the hundreds of millions. He decided careers. Hoffman was standing near the bar with 2 other executives and a well-known director, deep in conversation about the current wave of black-led films and whether it represented a genuine shift or simply a passing trend. Ali was 8 feet away, close enough to hear everything, far enough that Hoffman didn't realize he had an audience. The numbers are interesting, Hoffman was saying, swirling his scotch. But let's be honest. The mainstream audience, the real audience, the one that determines whether a picture makes money, that audience wants to see themselves on screen. And themselves, for most of America, is still white. The director nodded. Sydney proved you can win an award, but you can't build a franchise around a black leading man. The system doesn't work that way. It's not about prejudice, Hoffman continued. And here was the thing that made Ali's hands clench at his sides. There was genuine conviction in his voice. He believed every word. It's about economics, what audiences respond to. We're not in the business of social engineering. We're in the business of selling tickets. One of the other executives lowered his voice. The blaxploitation trend is a bubble. It's going to burst. And when it does, we go right back to where we were. Nobody challenged him. Nobody shifted uncomfortably. These were men speaking among themselves, sharing the same assumptions, the same quiet certainty that the way things were was simply the way things had to be. Ali listened to every word, and then he walked over. Excuse me. Ali's voice cut through their conversation like a blade through silk. Hoffman looked up. His eyes widened for just a fraction of a second. The involuntary reaction almost everyone had when Muhammad Ali appeared directly in front of them. Up close, the size difference was almost comical. But it wasn't Ali's size that made people straighten their spines. It was his eyes, focused, calm, and carrying something that told everyone present this was not going to be a casual exchange. Mr. Ali, Hoffman said, recovering quickly. Enjoying yourself? I am, Ali said. His tone was light, almost friendly, but I couldn't help overhearing what you were saying. About black actors, about what audiences want. A subtle shift moved through the group. The director suddenly found his drink fascinating. One of the executives took a half step backward. Hoffman didn't flinch. We were just having an honest conversation about the business. I appreciate honesty, Ali said. So let me be honest with you two. He paused. What he was about to say had been building for years, and he needed every word to land exactly where it needed to. You said the mainstream audience wants to see itself on screen. that black leading men can't carry a franchise, that this whole movement is a bubble. Hoffman nodded carefully. Here's what I think, Ollie said, and his voice shifted. The warmth was still there, but beneath it now was something harder. Something forged in courtrooms and locker rooms, and the silence of nights when the government was threatening to destroy him. I think you're right that it works that way right now, but I think you're asking the wrong question entirely. The group had grown without anyone consciously joining it. Ollie noticed and made a decision. He raised his voice, not shouting, just projecting, the way a man who had spent his entire life filling arenas knew exactly how to fill a room. Can I have everyone's attention for 1 minute? The party slowed, and then it stopped. 47 people were listening. Some held champagne glasses. Some had moved closer. Others stood frozen, understanding that something significant was unfolding and not wanting to miss a single word. Eastwood had appeared at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral, watching Ollie the way a man watches a fire he started but can no longer control. Ollie began to speak, and when he did, he spoke the way he fought, with precision, with power, and with an intelligence that caught you off guard before you realized you had been hit. I want to ask every person in this room a question. Answer it honestly, not out loud, just to yourselves. You let the silence hold. How many of you have actually been brave? A few uncomfortable laughs. Ollie didn't smile, didn't react. I mean it. How many of you have done something in your life that genuinely cost you everything? Something where if you followed your conscience, you might lose your career, your freedom, your future? Something where every person around you told you to sit down and be quiet? Silence. Because I have. I stood up to the United States government and told them no. I lost my title. I lost my license. I lost 3.5 years of my career. I faced 5 years in federal prison. And I did it because my conscience told me it was the only thing I could do. He turned slowly, making eye contact with different faces in the crowd. Now look at this room. Directors, producers, studio executives, people who have made billions telling the world stories about courage, about heroes, about men who stand up when everyone else sits down. He paused. How many of you have actually done that? Not on a screen, in real life, when it actually cost you something. The silence was absolute. Ali's voice dropped. Quieter now, but somehow more powerful for it. I'll tell you what I see when I look at this room. I see an industry that has spent 60 years telling the world that black people are less than, that we are dangerous, that we are not smart enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough to be the heroes of your stories. Walter Hoffman shifted his weight. His jaw tightened. I see an industry that made billions off that lie. And I see a room full of people who benefited from that lie and never once had the courage to question whether it was right. Hoffman opened his mouth. Ollie held up his hand, firmly, not aggressively. The gesture of a man who understood authority not because it had been given to him, but because he had earned it. I'm not finished. He turned to face the full room, and everyone present was reminded of exactly who this man was. Not someone playing a role. Muhammad Ali. The man who had looked the entire United States government in the eye and refused to blink. You want to know why black men can't be leading men in Hollywood? It's not because of what audiences want. Audiences want what you tell them to want. You shape the narrative. You decide what's normal. And for 60 years, you have decided that a black man on screen can be funny, can be scary, can be the sidekick, but he can never, never be the man the audience aspires to become. The reason you've never changed it isn't economics. It is fear. Fear that if black men become real heroes on your screens, complex, powerful, human heroes, audiences will start asking why real life doesn't match the movies. Why the country that calls itself the land of the free treats its own people like strangers. Ali's voice carried the full weight of everything he had lived. He looked directly at Eastwood, not with anger, with challenge. I'm standing here tonight asking whether anyone in this room has that kind of courage. Because from where I'm standing, the bravest thing anyone here has ever done is play pretend. The silence that followed was unlike anything that had ever filled that living room. It wasn't anger. It wasn't offense. It was something more complicated. The silence of people who had just been shown a mirror they didn't know existed and didn't like what they saw. Eastwood stood at the edge of the crowd, face giving nothing away. He was extraordinary at that. Decades of playing unreadable characters had made the skill genuine. But those who knew him well could see something working behind his eyes. And beneath that, something that looked very much like discomfort. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Eastwood uncrossed his arms and walked toward Ollie. The crowd parted, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Everyone understood what was coming next would define the night. "You done?" Eastwood asked. Calm, direct, just Eastwood being Eastwood. "For now," Ollie said. Eastwood nodded slowly, looked out at his guests, the faces of people he had known for years, and then back at Ollie. "You think I'm part of the problem," he said. Ollie held his gaze. "Steady. I think you're part of the system. And I think being part of a system doesn't make you a bad person. But it does make you responsible for what that system does." Eastwood considered that. The two men stood facing each other, two of the most iconic figures of their generation. Two completely different versions of what it meant to be tough in America. One version was constructed, rehearsed, filmed in 30 takes, and scored with music. The other was real. "I hear you," Eastwood said. And then he did something that surprised almost everyone in the room. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't reach for the comfortable excuse that he was one of the good ones. He simply asked, "What do you want us to do about it?" What happened in the weeks and months that followed became one of Hollywood's least told stories. Eastwood didn't make grand public declarations. That wasn't his nature. Instead, he made quiet, deliberate changes. In his next directorial project, he fought the studio to cast black actors in roles originally written as white. He challenged the assumption, at meetings where such assumptions went unchallenged, that black leading men couldn't carry serious films. He used his growing influence to open doors that had been sealed shut for decades. He wasn't perfect. No one expected him to be. But he tried. And in Hollywood, where real trying was rarer than it should have been, that mattered. Walter Hoffman went home that night and didn't sleep. The next morning, he called a meeting with his development team. He told them to ask one question about every script in development. Are we telling this story because it's good or because it's comfortable? It was a small shift, but small shifts at the right level move mountains. Over the next 2 years, Hoffman Studio greenlit more black-led films than it had in the previous decade combined. The pipeline had opened, and once a pipeline opens, it is very difficult to close without someone noticing. Ollie never spoke publicly about that night. When reporters asked him about Hollywood, he deflected with humor. "I'm a boxer," he would say, smiling. "I leave the acting to the actors." But those who were there never forgot it. Years later, one of the directors present that evening wrote in his memoir, "I have been in Hollywood 40 years. I have witnessed 1,000 moments where someone said something that seemed important. But the night Ollie spoke at Eastwood's place was different. It was the only time in my career I felt genuinely ashamed of the industry I had spent my life building. And the first time I believed it might actually change." In 1976, Eastwood directed The Outlaw Josie Wales. He cast Scatman Crothers, a black actor, in a significant role that had originally been written for a white performer. On paper, a small change. In the context of Hollywood at that time, it was a statement. When a journalist asked about the casting decision, Eastwood paused for a long time before answering. "I learned something a couple of years back," he said, "about the difference between acting tough and actually being tough. The toughest man I ever met wasn't in any of my movies." He didn't name Ollie. He didn't need to. Muhammad Ali went on to fight Joe Frazier one final time in Manila in 1975, the Thrilla in Manila. He retired, came back, retired again. He battled Parkinson's disease through the final decades of his life with a quiet dignity that surprised even those who thought they understood him completely. But for those who knew the story of that November night, Ali's greatest fight was never in Manila, never against Foreman, never against the United States government. His greatest fight happened in a living room, with no gloves, no ring, no referee, just Muhammad Ali, his voice, and the courage to say what no one else in the room had the nerve to say. Because anyone can throw a punch. Anyone can play tough on a screen, behind a camera, in front of a crowd that will cheer no matter what. But it takes a different kind of champion to walk into a room full of power and say, I see exactly what you are doing. I see why you're doing it. And I'm not going to let you pretend it is acceptable. That night, Muhammad Ali didn't knock anyone out. He did something harder. He woke them up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the fight against a broken system isn't won in boxing rings or courtrooms alone. It is won in rooms like that one. In moments when a single person has the courage to speak what everyone else is too afraid to say. Muhammad Ali showed us that the most powerful weapon against injustice has never been a fist. It has always been a voice willing to use the truth.